Hi, and welcome back to Rise Up Stories. My name is Vicky Ross. I'm your host. And today, being a story, I have brought a long-standing friend by the name of Andrew. Now, Andrew, I met around about 2010. He participated in one of my NLP business practitioners, and what started as a 7-day, him being a student and I was his trainer, turned to be a very, very rewarding friendship. And there's a lot of things about Andrew that I absolutely admire. He's got the most amazing resilience, and I've learned a lot more about his resilience through doing this story. But he's got amazing resilience. He's got such integrity and beautiful life philosophy that it was one of those things that when I started my Rise Up Stories, I thought I've got to bring Andrew in and share him to the world. So I'd like to introduce you to my friend Andrew. And Andrew, if you can say hi and just start your life story wherever your life story wants to begin in this episode. We've only got a few, like less than an hour, but let's go for it. Let's see what we can do.
Oh, thank you, Vicky. That's a nice introduction. Oh, gosh, my life story. Well, I think I'm at the end of my professional career and enjoying retirement. And I spent 42 years in healthcare, which molded me really into the person. I mean, I started my career, as we previously discussed, really, in the Thatcherism years. Yeah. And I started off as a factory labourer.
Wow. Okay, so you loved Thatcher then.
Oh, yeah. She really kind of helped me grow. And, I was in the steel industry in Sheffield I started as a factory labourer because there was no other work, and you had to, it was the years of the buzzcocks and all that stuff going on, and revolutions that weren't appearing. Similar times, really, to what I'm seeing now for the younger generation.
Yeah.
But in that 18 months, the only thing I ever learned was how to play ant music by a demand with 2 spanners on the top of a lathe. And it was
the stand and deliver. I remember Adam.
Yes. Yeah. And the painted faces. Yes. And to cut a very long story short on this aspect, basically there was 5 lathes going down in a line, and the beginning of your career was there, lathe number 1, shall we say, and the end of your career was 5 lathes down. Yeah. And the difference was the people at the end of the line were allowed to wear brown overalls compared to blue. Oh. And I thought to myself after 18 months, and I was a labourer, I was cleaning the machines, these were apprenticeships, but I was kind of aspiring to be an apprentice at that time. And I thought, I've got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here. And what it showed me was the rough life of kind of factory working. Mm. And I found myself filling in every application form going, which I think is kind of what I'm seeing the young folks doing today. And I quite fancied being a paramedic. Okay. Or firefighter, which I think is relevant to later on when I ended up working for the fire service and I ended up working in pre-hospital care. But I ended up as a holding block. I went into nursing, thinking, okay, at the age of 18, having left school at 16, I need to do something. And to be a paramedic at that point, you had to be 21. So it was that was the rationale. But I ended up doing my nurse training and thoroughly enjoyed it. And we talked about resilience and the clinic. The reason it's important is that clinical career throughout, which we're going to built me a resilience, my way of how I coped with the world. Because I went down a nursing route, which was predominantly accident and emergency.
Okay.
But then that took me into pre-hospital care. which took me to the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. So I was working in Saudi Arabia, working for the Ministry of Defence and Aviation of Saudi, and was evacuating Saudi, Syrian, Bangladeshi military who'd been injured back to Saudi Arabia.
How old were you then?
Oh gosh, that was 1990. So yeah, I was kind of in my late 20s, wasn't I? Early 30s. I spent the whole full 12 months there. It was quite ironic, really, because I ended up getting this role working for the Moda, and I flew in on August the 1st/2nd, late at night in this aircraft, not knowing that there'd been an invasion into Kuwait. And they basically said, well, we'll give you a very handsome bonus if you stay because we need nurses, or you can get back on this plane and fly out. So I thought, well, I'm going to be unemployed if I come back. So what's my option?
Take the bonus.
Take the bonus. And it was my skill set, trauma in its physical sense rather than its emotional sense, and pre-hospital. So I was flying in aircraft, which I love. I later became a pilot, general aviation. And so it showed me. So it was so fulfilling that I ended up staying a year until the actual ground offensive finished. So I then came back in May 1991, roughly. And I ended up then going out to Iraq and worked in a refugee camp.
Wow.
And in the end, there was 48,000 refugees and a team of 11 of us working a mobile hospital unit, dealing with things like cholera, diphtheria, trauma. There was a lot of landmines. There was a lot. The population, it was in the northern Kurdistan, so we went in through Iran and then drove up onto the Iran-Iraq border. And they were living in tents given by UNICEF and the UN. And obviously candles were the mode of heat and lighting. So there was tent fires, mine injuries, and then diphtheria, cholera, typhoid. So that was extremely challenging because there was no resources there. It was the kit that we bought in, and we established.
It sounds really, really hard. How long did you do that for?
Well, we were there. That was a part of kind of the medical team that I was working with. We were a team that went in and established. So we were there about only 2.5 weeks, and then we handed over to Save the Children and the United Nations, where they then established a more long-term. So part of my background was always, and continued after that, being part of a team that went in and did very acute, rapid interventions, and then handed over to more sustainable. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And because of the way I know you, it makes perfect sense. I know you were very young then, very, very testing, trying times, but your skills, who you are in your core, were already starting to shine through.
Yeah. That was built on, I went to work in America for a while before the Gulf War. I was in Northern Ireland as well. So it gives a flavour of kind of the work I was doing, which was around wanting to become this pre-hospital trauma expert. And because it wasn't around at that time, but I could see from my days of working in the States what England could look like. And it looks like pre-hospital emergency care today, but that didn't exist at that time. And I was lucky enough, I reckon, to be one of the founders and father figures of that, because, I did do work that allowed and opened doors. So after coming back from Iraq, I was then working in clinical A&E departments, and I got seconded to Greater Manchester Fire Service to set up a trauma system for them, which we did for about 4 years, setting up systems. Yeah, and during that time, I worked with the military.
Can I ask you to talk about a very, very high achievement that you've got here? Because is it at this time where you did something that it was introduced to this country, something you saw in the States about with the fire service, where they, come talk to me about, you know what I'm talking about. Share this achievement, because it's big.
Yeah, it was big at the time, and still going today, I understand. And so there was a gap, and the thing about the fire service at that time was that they, particularly in Manchester, they could get a fire pump anywhere to an incident within 4 minutes. Now, when you look at trauma, blocked airways, severe road traffic accidents, stabbings, gunshot wounds, cardiac arrest from heart attacks, these minutes count.
Yeah.
And so at the time, the ambulance service response was 9 minutes, fire pump was 4. So we worked with Greater Manchester Fire Service to put in trauma technicians at two-tiered system, so that every firefighter went through what we call this basic trauma life support. And then we put a trauma technician who went on to do a more robust course and time in accident and emergency departments and theatres on each pump, so that every shift had this qualified trauma technician. It was somewhere between a medical technician and a paramedic. It was somewhere around in between that. And it was fundamentally set up to support other firefighters being injured.
Yeah.
And then we'd have a resource. And that was a political move, because we were getting so much resistance from the ambulance service at that time. There was a lot of division, a lot of barriers between this is our role and this is your role. And so therefore it was put in predominantly to support fire service personnel, because there's certain situations where only firefighters could go, but then could become injured. But obviously it mushroomed out, because you can't give people those skills and then not allow them to use it when they're first on scene at a road traffic accident, as a working example. Yeah,
so they're sitting there first to arrive and helpless to do anything because they're not trained or
I would argue at the time were maybe inappropriately trained, because trauma care is very specific, C-spine injuries, and how you open airways without getting too technical is important when you've got potential spinal injury, yet they weren't taught how to do that.
Yeah.
So yes, there was recorded incidents where firefighters felt very helpless at the scene of a road traffic accident, waiting for the ambulance service to arrive. And it's not criticism of the ambulance service, their response times were slower than what was required for fire. And that kind of mushroomed into fundamentally becoming a derivative of it. So the Greater Manchester Trauma Technician system set up, and then other brigades started to adopt a very similar approach, and if not the approach, across the whole of the country. And it all came, it's interesting we talk about this at this time, because I won't name them, but there was a firefighter, and it's his anniversary of his death this week as we're speaking, there was a fault on the fire pump door. And as they were dispatched in the middle of the night to a car fire, he leant on the handle and fell out of the fire pump. Oh. And received massive head injuries. And the hospital team at the time clearly stated on record that if it hadn't been for the trauma technicians who were on the pump with him, providing emergency trauma care to get him to hospital, then he would have succumbed to his injuries immediately. And he did survive a few days, but then died. Now that for the fire service and for the trauma technicians and the academy that we'd established was a turning point, because all the diehards at that time who were saying, not sure we really want this, they actually saw its true application. It was conceived to support firefighters in an environment where they couldn't get any other help. And that was the catalyst for it to be really embedded, in my belief, really embedded into Greater Manchester Fire Service, because they said this must never happen again. Yes, they'll fix the locks, but they wanted the emergency response to be so close.
Yeah.
It got so good that, I'd be working in the emergency room in Manchester, and a fire pump would pull up, sirens blaring. They'd contacted us, and they'd be pulling a patient out on a spinal board, fully packaged, because they could no longer wait for an ambulance. And they knew that this patient needed to get to the emergency department and the surgeon's hands. And we did a piece of research with Manchester University that showed that that basically they saved more lives doing this system than they ever did from fires. Wow. In the first 12 months of its implementation. So for me personally, it was a fantastic piece of work.
What an achievement, really. What an achievement.
It's legacy stuff. Yeah. And kind of knowing that they've still got some form of that system. I don't know the detail, but they've got trauma technicians, because I see it on the news sometimes. I read in newspapers that trauma technicians performed emergency care at the roadside. So some form of it is still going on as a legacy. Although, pre-hospital care in England has changed, and so much for the better with the helicopter systems and the roving critical care paramedics now. But having that kind of layer, and that led on, that work was well recognised, and that led on to other organisations, such as, again, these things that are difficult to talk about because of the work that we're doing, but part of the UK Special Forces, we ended up training tactical firearm teams. We ended up training because there was this niche, there was this gap where immediate trauma care we knew saved lives, but it couldn't be provided because of the environment these people were working in.
Yeah.
And therefore we gave these people these skills. So I went on to work with those organisations, and again, Greater Manchester Police in their firearm teams and some of their road teams. And then that can be moved on to things that we talked about previously. I also started to train flight crews, cabin crew in defibrillation and airway management, because again, they're in an environment where they couldn't wait for people to come along who had the skill set.
Well, yeah, when you're 35,000 feet above the ground.
Exactly.
Because
and
I remember someone. Yeah.
Yeah. And defibrillation, there were semi-automatics at that time, and now fully automatic. They're so easy to use. And we wanted, I'd seen the American system. I'd been to Seattle. I'd worked in Pittsburgh. I'd worked in Dallas, where, every emergency vehicle carried a defib. And it wasn't about which emergency service was called. The nearest emergency vehicle went. And, I saw on the news the other day about a campaign going on about putting defibs in every police car in England.
Yeah.
Well, then in 1989, that's what was happening in America.
Yeah.
And there's the kind of laughable thing that in Seattle, where all this kind of work took off around early defibrillation, there were people, the laughable joke was that there were people lining up to do CPR because everyone was trained in CPR. And on every street corner was a defib. And now we do see that. But the struggle we had trying to put defibrillators onto fire pumps is another massive conversation. It was just something that wasn't allowed to be done because of the demarcation. A fire pump could get there in 4 minutes, and they served the community. So, I've seen in that career a massive transformation. And part of that was I contributed to it. And it was, one of those things that, is a fantastic legacy. But then I went on from there, working more on an international level. Mm-hmm. the foundations being the Gulf conflict and then Iraq gave me a lot of, in the refugee camp, gave me a lot of skill set. And the fire service gave me a high profile. And therefore I went on and I worked again as an international assessor. And I went to Afghanistan on 2 occasions. The first one being around 98. Now that was interesting in itself because I was in Kabul, and I went all over Afghanistan in a taxi. We drove, looking again. I'm a bit challenged on what I can talk about on that, but that's when the Mujahideen were in power rather than the Taliban. And then I went back again in 2001, just before the ground offensive, where, again, I worked in a small team that we needed to close down some of the facilities, knowing there was an impending ground offensive, and take out these Land Rovers and other equipment to clear these houses where we'd got things. And yeah, so that was we talk about Rise Up. That was the most life-threatening experience I've ever had. Was the second time. The first time was really bizarre because the Mujahideen were in power. It was roadblock after roadblock of different tribal groups. So you literally had to bribe your way through to get to places. But on the second occasion, the Taliban were in power, and obviously didn't. Yeah. I think there was a naivety the first time, and then there's that saying, isn't there? Stupid is what stupid does. And I went back a second time, and the second time was more scary because not only were it, when the Mujahideen were in power and there was different factions, it was kind of very, very chaotic. But bizarrely, I felt a bit safer. When I went the second time, the Taliban were in power. I remember having a conversation with the equivalent of their Secretary of State for Health about closing down some of the healthcare programs. And he had an AK-47 on his desk. And he said to me, through an interpreter, basically, that if he didn't like what I was saying to him, then the gun would be the solution. God. Now, that's an interesting negotiation point, isn't it?
Really? Because how do you know what's the right thing to say?
Yeah, and my agenda was, I've got to take this equipment out. His agenda was, you keep it in. And we spent a lot of time sleeping on roofs because they had what we sussed out, the psychology of it all was that they had they being the Taliban, they had a very routine, which was morning prayer, and then they'd come and hunt us and try and capture us. And so we slept on roofs. When you heard the early morning prayer, we then got our stuff together and we'd roof hop, or we'd get in the vehicles and drive off. Unfortunately, I won't say captured, I got arrested would be the word. Kandahar Airport, which was the motherland of the Taliban at that time, their home base. And I ended up being arrested. I got out via the United Nations. They negotiated my release.
Wow.
And basically they put me on a UN flight back to Islamabad. And that was quite a scary moment, because you do all these things and you actually don't recognize your life might be at risk until it is.
And do you find that sometimes it's when you look back at what could have happened in that moment, because in the moment you're just focusing on survival, and then it's over and you're safe, and then you look back and then it's like, oh my God, that's what's really
yes, yeah, and you start thinking about what there might have been. There weren't, but you think what might have happened, which is a bizarre mental psyche, because I didn't think of that at the time.
Yeah.
But you think about it afterwards. And then one of the team that I went out with, so I was flown back because I was no longer viable, useful. One of the other guys that was in the team, he unfortunately died. And you do think, well, I had a guilt trip about that, to be honest, Vicky, because I was the team medic and team medic and logistics. When I was shipped out and then he died, I thought, well, maybe I could have done some. I couldn't have done something under the circumstances. I know that when I found out how he did die. But it's kind of, there's a guilt trip there, because when you're going in as a team medic, you want to be their medic.
Yeah, and help them survive.
Help them survive. And we go in as a team, we came out as a team, and that didn't happen on the second occasion. It ended up being very fragmented. So yeah, it was, but did I suffer PTSD as the post-traumatic stress disorder? I think I did. And that's where our journey kind of came together, didn't it? Around neurolinguistic programming, because before, I felt as though I had some of those symptoms and was looking for a solution. Yeah. And when you look back, I think I did, because, you'd hear a bang go off. And when I first came back, I literally jumped under a table. Yeah. And then you realize that's not normal. No. It might have been normal in Kabul or in Kandahar or Herat, but it wasn't normal in
Manchester.
In Manchester.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I didn't get any kind of flashbacks and stuff like that. But I did think about the team and what could we have done differently.
It's interesting how the mind will replay. Had we done this? Had we done this? Maybe if I said this. Maybe if we didn't go there. Maybe if we did go there. Maybe if I'd done this first. Maybe if I hadn't done that first. To see if it could have had a different outing, a different result. And sadly, if we can just catch ourselves in that moment and go, it couldn't have happened any other way because it happened the way it happened. And we can never, it's a true testament that we can never go back to the past. The past isn't real. Thinking about it, agonizing about it, doesn't change it, because you can't go back and change it. You have to, the only thing you can do is accept.
Yeah, and I did have problems accepting it. But you do come to a point where you recognize it's just wasted energy. Yeah. And that overthinking about the past is a waste of energy.
But how did you come to that? Because in the work that I do, there's people that are still going over things that happened 40 years ago. They haven't yet reconciled in their minds that what I'm thinking about is wasted energy. Is they still angry? They're still scared. They're still feeling inadequate because of something that happened so long ago.
Yeah, and that's a very interesting question for me as an individual. It goes back to that word resilience. It's what my past allowed me to formulate a resilience plan. That for me, which had its pros and definitely its cons, was around detachment. And if the pros were that because my clinical career was the way it was, and I was seeing a lot of death and I was seeing a lot of injuries, life-changing injuries, then that detachment was really, really necessary for me to survive. What I do know through working with people like yourselves and NLP and all that sort of stuff at that time, that detachment also didn't support me in relationships. Yeah. Because I became detached. I found it difficult to love, basically. I found it difficult to get close to people because they may not be there. Not saying they're going to die, but they may leave. So why am I putting this energy in? You distort it into those kind of natural things that it shouldn't be distorted into.
And the thing is, at the time, it's the best choice to survive a situation is to detach.
Yes.
What you don't realize, so that kind of detachment that you do for survival is an adaptation of yourself, because that way you can get through it. However, 10 years later, 20 years later, whatever it is, that adaptation is no longer needed. However, that adaptation it's almost become part of your personality, or so you think. And therefore, you're still detached, even though you're not in the war zone.
Yeah. Yeah. And the conversation we've had about the war zones, people could turn around and go, well, that was a unique situation and an unusual situation. But that detachment also was beneficial in my accident and emergency career.
Yeah.
People coming in the 20s, cot deaths coming in, and you're having to tell, the relatives that your child's died. And it's kind of after doing the resuscitation and, all those detachments, it's kind of, it builds up.
Yeah.
You're doing that 2 or 3 times a day.
Yeah.
And I was in a career for 24 years where I was front line.
Yeah.
It builds. And then you're seeing it in those, 48,000 refugees. You're seeing it at such an intensity.
Yeah.
For periods of time and in people, 40 odd thousand people living in tents and it's what people in the Gaza are seeing right now and in Lebanon right now.
Awful.
Yeah. When you're in it, the intensity is significant. So your only way of, I'm not saying it's a generalization here, but my only way of coping was detachment.
Yeah.
I did that now and I'm doing this now. And then I walk away and I blank it out. But it does have a roll on subconscious effect. And that at some point has to be worked through.
Yeah.
And that's where you kind of, that rebirth and reborn and you need to get through that to be able to move forward is what I found. But I didn't do it in a very structured way. I came on NLP courses. I was looking myself, trying to do self-work the time, but still trying to hold down a marriage, trying to hold down a very busy career and all those sort of things. There was no reflective time. There was no, can I take a year out and work on myself? That would have been ideal. But, society doesn't allow you to do that. You're in this rat race of trying to keep up with your peer groups, trying to hold down a mortgage, trying to pay your bills. And it's always there simmering. And then so that got to a point in the kind of early 2000s where I had worked through a lot of that Afghan stuff, the Kurdistan stuff, and therefore decided that I could no longer do a clinical career. I could see I was heading for a complete burnout. So I ended up moving into management within healthcare and then worked my way up through management roles and into leadership roles where we again met when I was working in Manchester and in Shrewsbury. What I didn't recognise at that time was the toxicity of management and also leadership. It came with its own political agenda.
Yeah.
And hopefully what any listener will have learned was that I was, at that point, I would class myself as a humanitarian. That was the language, I guess, I would label myself with now, looking back. Mm-hmm. Very, very patient focused, whether that's in an A&E department or in a refugee camp or in the middle of Afghanistan. And I found management in healthcare not patient focused.
At all.
A big generalization from my point. There could be managers there listening to this screaming, going, you're wrong. But I've worked in a number of organizations within the health service, and there was a general consistent factor.
Yeah.
And there was a very small group that I would call the minority that were patient focused, and they generally came from a clinical career background.
Yeah.
And
you know, Andrew, I worked in quite a few of those organizations, so I totally support what you say, because I've worked with other people, not yours. And I've seen a lot of people that were absolutely brilliant for their jobs, wanted the best outcome. And then there were others. But the others, I wouldn't say that they weren't sort of, like good heart. There was a lot of toxicity, as you say, in that thing, because there was just so much threat and so much pressure that everybody was just desperately trying to survive. And some people were just trying to survive for themselves so that they still had a career and a salary supporting their families. So they would put up with whatever was told, as if almost it looked like, I don't care, I'll just do whatever they say as long as you give me my salary. But it was toxic, because it was to the detriment of what they were there for. And then there were the very, very small that said, no, I'm here for a certain reason and I'm honoring that, and therefore I'm going to put myself at risk. But as you know, you put yourself at risk and stand for your principles, and you get yourself in trouble with that.
Yeah, definitely. And that, I'd rather not name the organisation, no. but I did come foul of that in the trying to modernise. I became a change agent, neurolinguistic programming helped with that. Yeah. I went down a system called theory of constraints, which allowed to look at bottlenecks in systems, and was a change agent. And, in the organisation I ended up in, didn't want that change. And I fell foul of kind of my chief exec at the time, and we went into conflict, and that ended up me being kind of put on gardening leave, for want of a better word, for a period of around 13 months.
Yeah.
And that was, again, quite, probably tell by the way I'm not speaking or breaking up, but that was a real hardship.
I remember it so well.
Yeah, because it had never happened to me before. We've discussed the clinical career that I'd had and how important it was to me as an individual, but also the population that I was trying to serve. And I was trying to do the same in, this organisation. And I fell foul of, and to this day, I know what the accusation was around not modernising. Ironically, I was accused of not modernising a service quick enough, and therefore was put on gardening leave. The real reason, as I saw it, was that they were trying to deband everybody, at least 2 grades. And I stood up. I stood up for my managers. I stood up for myself, put my head above the parapet, because I was thinking that was the right thing to do. And fundamentally, I got shot.
Yeah, they knocked you off
they knocked me off the parapet. And I did get support from some of my managers. Others I didn't, in the sense that I never heard from them again. And it started that, I guess that's one of my first leadership roles, where, you put your head above the parapet because you want to support the people around you and who were working very, very hard for you in a very difficult system. And the new executive team were wanting to downband everybody to save money. And I put my head above the parapet and bang. And suddenly you're working in this like huge environment, lots and lots of hours a day, and then suddenly you're at home doing nothing.
Yeah.
And the clock's ticking, and they've got the upper cards because they can just, we discussed this previously, what a waste of public money to keep me sat at home. But they had the upper card and one of the kind of things that I worked through with yourself and others was that, well, if that's the game they want to play, I'll play it. And rather, I've seen it done previously, and I've seen it done afterwards, where people then go, oh, well, okay, you put me on gardening leave, I'm just going to go and find another job and leave. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't from the situation I was in at that time with my kids in infant school, and my ex-wife was working in the local community as well, it would have been a significant uplift to move them. So, my strategy was, right, I will sit it out. And 13 months later, we did come to an agreement, and that allowed me to move on. But that time was, again, resilience, again, detachment, but forced detachment, because I wasn't allowed to go on site.
You weren't allowed to talk to anyone?
Wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. I went through a number of interviews with investigating officers, and they couldn't, no accusations, no charges were ever brought because they couldn't find anything. And it got resolved when that chief exec left.
And I remember that the way it got resolved was, we're really sorry, move on. And I just thought,
yes,
had you not looked after yourself, had conversations with myself and the other people that were supporting you, I've seen this happen to other people. It completely destroys people. So if nothing else, kudos on you for standing up and saying, it will not take me down.
Yeah, it took me down a few ladders, but it didn't make me fall to the bottom.
No.
My confidence did get knocked. I was lucky enough after when he left, within a month, they called me in and went, well, we need to come to some form of agreement, that I signed these forms, so I'm retired now, it's not a problem, but, it's something that I'm not supposed to talk about.
And, a bit of an NDA.
Yeah, definitely. And, we've all moved on, hope you can, sort of thing. Bye-bye.
Yeah, have a nice laugh.
And I was literally, met in a car park of the hospital. How it was done was just, how I would not want to do it to anybody else.
No.
And but luckily, again, I won't name the organisation, but luckily, pretty much straight afterwards, I got another post because I was free from the shackles. I come out with the standard reference, started no longer. I think the thing that really, really annoyed me during that kind of 13 months was that they owned me.
Yeah.
They held the cards around ownership. I could have gone and got another job, but at that time the reference wasn't agreed.
Yeah.
There's no smoke without fire. All those sort of connotations were going through my head. How my self-worth had taken a knocking.
Yeah.
And therefore, how can I come up from this? And I wanted closure.
Yeah.
And the only way I could get closure was to see it through.
Yeah.
I think if I'd walked away, I wouldn't have had closure.
No.
And that was the resilience piece on why I stuck it out, because I could have got another job, yes.
So was there a moment in that time that you said to yourself, no, damn it, no, they will not destroy me. I've done nothing wrong. If anything, I've done everything right. I remember at that time, your division was actually financially doing so much better than the others that they were looking at like, what are you doing wrong? That is showing as, you being profitable compared to the others. You're making everybody else look bad.
Yeah, and we'd won national awards.
I know. So what was it inside of you that said, I will not lie down and just take this? Because that for me is that pivoting point, that rise up moment where you go, it sucks, I'm scared, they knocked me, but no.
I think it's the way they treated me.
Yeah.
And in particular, that chief exec at that time. And this is hard for me to say, really, but I really started to hate the person.
Mm.
And because he had so much power over me, but also over my family.
Yeah.
And, I think we'd use the word bullying now, that
Yeah.
I was bullied out of the organisation. And I had such hatred for that individual, because everything he was throwing at me, I could fight back. I was, the files I had of the work we've been doing, both with yourself and my teams, the excellence awards that we'd won, the transformation of the services, that I just felt really, really wronged. And betrayed. There was some, betrayed. And I just felt, you've done me wrong here, and I'm not going to allow you to bully me out of the organisation. And that was the moment when I saw their evidence against me and the accusations that they put forward with no substance whatsoever. And they brought in this investigator from another organisation who happened to be a personal friend of the chief exec. You just knew it stank.
Yeah.
And I thought, yes, I could walk away, start my own business, become an interim, because at the time I didn't think I'd get a substantive job because, my ego was hurt. My career was damaged. And I thought, okay, I'm going to fight this. You're not going to get away regarding this at all. And
I'm so glad you did.
There's certain points in time in your life, you have to stand up.
Yeah.
And, some people want to stand up and be counted, blah, blah, blah. I stood up for my team and I got knocked down, but I was damned if I was going to be buried by this. It was okay, I'm going to fight you with everything I've got. And even to the point where they then came up with the agreement after he'd gone, I still fought that.
Yeah.
I fought for the right agreement for me and my family, because I wasn't just going to lie back and take what they were offering.
And for me, Andrew, and I mean, we worked again later on, and there was some more of this similar kind of stuff going on. So that's why we know toxic is there. But it's a thing that I admire in you, and this is why I invited you today to talk to the Rise Up Stories. For somebody who feels knocked down, because you're an expert in this, somebody who's knocked down, what's the thing that you would say to them? What is like your little bit of gold nugget that you can give them to hold on and to stand up, rise up, and fight for their lives, fight for themselves?
I think I can't put it into one word. If it was going to be resilience. Yeah. I think on my gravestone, there'll be Andrew Kent was extremely resilient. The question is, and then I love the Spike Milligan quote of, and I told you I was ill. And I think for me, it's finding your resilience. Now that could be a run that makes you feel more robust, because it may not be a career thing. It could be a personal thing, that happens to you, a life-threatening event, death of a spouse. You've got to find your resilience that allows you to carry on, because life is very, very short. I'm now at the end of my career. I'm in my 60th decade, which I never, ever thought I would be at. I still sit here at times, can't believe I'm here. And it's gone in the blink of an eyelid. And so you've got to find that resilience and then use that to regrow, rebirth, whatever language you want to use, to move forward and move onwards. And there is the important lesson, I think I came out of working with yourself and neurolinguistic programming, was that, and the Eckhart Tolle stuff, there is only the now.
Yeah.
And you can regret the past.
Yeah.
And that's a wasted emotion.
Yeah.
And you can have anxiety about the future. And boy, is that a wasted emotion.
Yeah.
So there is now the power of now.
Yeah, it is.
And that is how I came to resilience, I still have regrets about the past in a much less about, not just about the incident we've talked about in depth, but my whole career. But I've also got some very, very good and positive memories about all that stuff. And now, where I went to after the Manchester experience was to start my own business and be a consultant for 4 years. And that was one of the happiest times in my life, professionally. And now I've retired from that and I'm living a retirement journey, which again is equally interesting and another conversation. But it's about, for me, that resilience piece, finding your resilience, and it is an individual thing. It ain't in a can that you can go to Tesco's and buy off the shelf.
No.
It's about self-exploration. It's about a journey. It's about living through these unfortunate events.
Because life does give you all these things. I haven't met anybody who's had a calm life. We've all had, some adversity, whether it's in childhood, in teenage years, in early life, middle life, end life, all our lives, it's there. But I think what makes us stay happy and positive is the way that we see it. And the way that we see it is the way we see ourselves and what this means. I mean, Adyashanti always talks about, and it's a Buddhist kind of thing, that all your suffering is down to attachments. Attachments to how you think an event should have gone, an attachment to how a person should have behaved with you, an attachment to how you should have reacted. And, we all do the best we can with what we've got in that moment. And the quicker we can release that attachment, the quicker that we are free and light and therefore focused to now.
Yeah, I agree. And, all philosophies have, part of my journey is yoga. Mm-hmm. And the movement of yoga, the asana, is just one of the 8 limbs. And, Sanskrit talks about detachment.
Yeah.
And, all the philosophies of the Eastern philosophy certainly have this detachment to physical things and to non-physical things, i.e. your memories and stuff like that. And that to me has been an extremely powerful journey. But it all relates, doesn't it, to try as best as you can to live in the now.
Yeah.
And because as we're sat here right now, there is no trouble in the world, in my own personal world. And every day I do, chants. And one of my loveliest ones is Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. And I interpret that as peace within me, peace within my world, and peace within my universe. Because at times you can't affect what's going on in the world, and you look around and it's an oh my God situation. But in me, and in my world, and in my universe, I promote peace and gratitude. Yeah. And for me, those 2 things are really, really important. And that's part of my resilience. I have gratitude for everything I do. And I live as far as I can. I wake up every morning wanting peace.
Yeah, and being grateful. I mean, I always teach people to go, in that moment where you know that you've got adversity kind of thoughts, feelings going on inside of you, you need to ask yourself right now, this very moment, I can feel my hands on my desk. I can feel my feet on the ground. I can feel the seat that I'm sitting on. I can see the blue skies and the clouds playing. I can see the bees going onto the things. I can hear the wind. In this moment where this is the only thing that is real for me, do I have a problem? And it's always a no. And therefore live in that moment and recognize that the only issues and struggles and stresses that we have is the things that are going on in our minds. So when we think about the politics and we think about Gaza, or we think about, what's happening anywhere in the world, then that opinion, that meaning, that attachment that we have, it's where the suffering comes from. But when I go, but actually I'm sitting here and I'm looking at the skies and the way that the clouds are moving and the bees outside and I can hear the wind. And in this moment, this is the only thing that is real, because I'm assuming the rest of the world exists. This is the moment. I can see that this world where is around me, it is true, it exists. Do I have a problem? No. And
I find, and I totally agree with everything you've said. And I find the asana in yoga, doing a yoga posture, whether that's hatha or the vinyasa, when you're in a pose, you really, with your breathing attached to that, which is the most important part of your asana, then you're in the now.
Yeah.
And that's the glimmer, the peacock, the opening of the curtain, the glimpse of the curtain, of being able
to the veil.
Exactly, of being in that now, rather than the busyness of your mind, which is always the challenge to control.
Yeah.
So
So I guess in many ways what you're saying, or what I hear you saying, is that the resilience basically comes down to hearing your mind, understand your mind, focus on your mind, control your mind, and be in the moment.
And that's your life's journey and purpose.
Yeah. And I mean, Eckhart Tolle has it like it's the journey back to yourself. When you're back to you, everything goes okay.
Yes. And it took me, and I'm still on that, I am on that journey. And I think if I was to tell my 20-year-old something self, I would be saying, start looking at that as early as you can.
Yeah. Unfortunately, like Joe Dispenza always talks about, that it normally takes a crisis for us to stop and step back and go, what happened? And analyze ourselves. And a lot of the times people then go, why did this happen to me, rather than what happened and how can I change that? I mean, you say you're still on that journey. I always say, and I say this, and I don't know if you remember me ever saying this in class, that I say that if you wake up in the morning and there's still breath in your body, you're still cooking. You're not done. So keep going.
Exactly, and have the gratitude that you're still breathing that morning.
Yeah. So
I know it sounds profound, but in the lives, in the career I've had,
it's so profound.
And it isn't a given.
I know. With gratitude, I sometimes, when I work with people that are really in a bad place, and I go, what are you grateful for? And they're going, oh, you're crazy. Have you seen my life? Nothing. There's nothing. I said, you know what? You woke up this morning. There are a lot of people in this world that didn't. Are you grateful for that?
Definitely.
Andrew, this was super, and I know I'm going to have to cut it short, but we are gone quite over, but that's fine. It's been a beautiful story and a beautiful conversation that we've had, and I'm very grateful for knowing you, for having you in my life, and for giving your time. So I'd like to say to everybody, if you enjoyed this and you know somebody that could benefit from listening to this, please share this episode. Subscribe so you will always know when the next episode's coming out. I have a beautiful membership where if you want to do more of this kind of work and be part of a beautiful community, the links are in the show notes. And for the rest, I'd like to say thank you to everybody for listening and have a good week, and here's to your success.